In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King and the head of Russia's Federal Agency for Atomic Energy, Rosatom, discuss energy cooperation. The draft state budget is passed after a vote that caps a 3-day debate at the lower house. And Jordan condemns Israeli settlers' assault on places of worship, including an arson attack on a West Bank mosque. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King met the head of the Russian Federal Agency for Atomic Energy, Rosatom, Sergei Kiriyenko, and an accompanying delegation currently on a visit to the kingdom. The king highlighted the strong ties between Jordan and Russia, as well as his keenness to further boost cooperation, mainly in the field of energy. In a separate meeting, Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour and Kiriyenko talked about energy cooperation between Jordan and Russia. Mansour said the government is examining the nuclear energy option to generate electricity to diversify the kingdom's energy resources. He stressed that the government has not decided yet to forge ahead with building a nuclear reactor. Kiriyenko voiced Moscow's keenness to enhance cooperation with Jordan in the energy domain. The lower house voted for the draft state budget, wrapping up a 3-day debate. 56 lawmakers of 102 who attended the session voted for the budget bill. In their deliberations, MPs aired their demands for their constituencies, with some assailing the government's economic strategy and urging it to refrain from raising prices. During the sessions chaired by Speaker Atif Tarawne and attended by Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour and cabinet ministers, legislators recorded their observations on key areas of the budget and the budgets of government units. The MPs called for updating laws and regulation of revenue-generating entities such as the income and sales tax, customs, and lands and survey departments. Those institutions, they stressed, should seek to upgrade their measures and elevate management and performance, better qualify their staff, and impose tighter controls to curb tax evasion. Most of the MPs who took the podium over the 3 days of debate focused on fiscal policy, the issues of prices and investment, as well as matters related to Syrian refugees and the political situation in the region. Foreign Minister Nasser Joudeh updated Senate President Abdulraouf al-Rawabdi on the ongoing Palestinian-Israeli peace talks and political developments in the region. Joudeh said Jordan's higher national interest is the canvas of the kingdom's positions towards regional issues. They discussed the repercussions of regional conflicts on the country and agreed to pursue coordination and keep the Senate up to date on developments. Rawabdi said the upper house was interested in closer coordination with the foreign ministry and to learn firsthand about all issues to serve the interest of citizens. Jordan renewed its condemnation of actions by extremist Israeli settlers against the Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied Jerusalem and places of worship in the West Bank. Minister of Media Affairs and official government spokesman Mohammed al-Momani said the storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque compound by settlers under Israeli police escort and the torching of West Bank mosques are criminal acts condemnable under international law. He said Jordan would pursue efforts with all possible means to take custody of Islamic and Christian holy sites and urged the world community to live up to its responsibility to stop all arbitrary and dangerous Israeli violations. In the latest settler attack, a mosque in the occupied West Bank was set ablaze. The main gate of the mosque in Derestiya village and some of the carpeting inside were charred by the flames. Racist graffiti in Hebrew reading "Revenge for Spilled Blood and Arabs Out" was scrawled on outside walls and a door. Such slogans have been used in previous attacks on Palestinian property carried out by the hardline settlers. Israeli soldiers entered Derestiya after the attack, and a police spokesman said a search for the suspects was underway. A series of settler vandalism acts involving arson and writing graffiti on homes in Palestinian villages in recent weeks has raised tensions.
They lit the carpet that is outside the door. The fire then spread under the door and burned about half a meter of carpet on the inside. If the residents had not been so alert, and one of the worshippers arriving at 4 in the morning, 1 hour ahead of dawn prayers, the fire would have engulfed the entire mosque.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said he would not let criticism of his Middle East peace efforts by Israel's defense minister deter him from trying to achieve a framework Palestinian-Israeli deal. Kerry spoke during a Syria donors conference in Kuwait in reaction to Israel's defense chief Moshe Yaalon's remarks dismissing a U.S. proposed security plan for the occupied West Bank. That drew a sharp rebuke from the White House and State Department. Yaalon later apologized. This report has more.
After months of peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians, led by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, Israel's defense minister has reportedly dismissed Kerry's efforts. Defense Minister Moshe Yaalon was quoted by a popular Israeli newspaper as saying Kerry is, quote, acting out of an incomprehensible obsession and a messianic feeling. He also reportedly said the secretary, quote, cannot teach me a single thing about the conflict with the Palestinians. U.S. State Department spokeswoman Marie Harf reacted firmly, calling Yaalon's comments offensive and inappropriate.
Secretary Kerry and his team, including General Allen, have been working day and night to try to promote a secure peace for Israel because of the Secretary's deep concern for Israel's future. That's precisely why the Secretary and his team have been working so hard here. To question his motives, to distort his proposals is not something we would expect from the defense minister of a close ally.
Now Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is on damage control. Addressing the Israeli parliament, Netanyahu said Israel and the U.S. were working together to promote peace in the region.
Even when we have disagreements with the United States, they always pertain to the matter at hand and are not personal.
In recent weeks, Kerry has been on a diplomatic blitz to persuade Israel and the Palestinians, who resumed talks in July after a 3-year deadlock, to agree to an outline proposal.
A car bomb blamed on a radical group linked to Al-Qaeda killed at least 26 people in a rebel-held town of northern Syria. Hours earlier, a Belgian commander from the same Al-Qaeda-linked group, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, was reported killed in northern Syria. The group's supporters denied the death. An array of Syrian rebel groups, including the large alliance known as the Islamic Front, have been trying to push out ISIL. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said most of those killed in the car bomb in Jarablus were from rival rebel groups, though it killed at least three civilians. As the deadly violence raged, Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Jawad Zarif arrived in Damascus for talks on the current preparations for the Geneva II peace talks on Syria's protracted conflict. Zarif met Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to discuss the danger of terrorism for the region and around the world, as well as the preparations for the Geneva II conference to be held in Switzerland after a week. The Iranian foreign minister also held talks with his Syrian counterpart Walid al-Muallim and Parliament Speaker Mohammad Jihad al-Laham. In the meantime, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon announced that donors promised more than $2.4 billion in humanitarian aid for Syria. He was addressing a Syrian donor conference in Kuwait. This report has the details.
World donor nations have made pledges at an international donor conference in Kuwait to help meet the United Nations target of $6.5 billion in aid for Syria. The appeal launched last month is the largest in the history of the United Nations.
We have reached a total this morning so far of $1.75 billion to kickstart our fundraising appeal for the year, an appeal which is for over $6.5 billion. My thank you to all of those states who have announced a contribution so far.
Donors, including the United States and Gulf Arab countries, have pledged $1.4 billion. Kuwait's Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Al-Sabah promised $500 million in fresh assistance, while the United States announced a contribution of $380 million. Qatar and Saudi Arabia pledged $60 million each. The European Union pledged $225 million and Britain $165 million.
I'd like to declare that His Highness, the Emir of Kuwait, Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Al-Jabr Sabah, announced that Kuwait will donate for the Syrian humanitarian needs $500 million, $500 million.
The EU Commissioner responsible for international cooperation, humanitarian aid and crisis response in Syria said EU contributions have been generous since the start of the conflict. But she said more needs to be done to allow civilians access to the aid.
Together with our member states, we are providing a total of $753 million from the beginning of the crisis up to today. That means a generous contribution of the European people of $3.5 billion. But this money means nothing for Syrians trapped behind fighting lines. For them, access for humanitarian workers is absolutely paramount. And this is why, from the hall, I made a plea to those who fight to spare innocent civilians and allow humanitarian workers to deliver life-saving assistance.
The $1.5 billion pledged via the United Nations at a similar meeting last year in Kuwait was used in Syria and surrounding countries to provide food rations, medicine, drinking water, and shelters. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has previously expressed regret that not all the promised donations have been received from the last meeting, with 20 to 30% still lacking. Ban said polio had returned and he was especially concerned about reports of starvation. The UN chief told the gathering he hoped peace talks due to be held in Switzerland on January 22nd would bring the Syrian government and opposition to the negotiating table. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
At least 75 people were killed in bomb attacks and shootings across Iraq in one of the bloodiest days in months. In the deadliest attack, a bomb blew up in a funeral tent in the south of Baquba, where mourners were marking the death of a militiaman killed 2 days ago. The attack killed 18 people and wounded 16. In northwestern Iraq, assailants detonated roadside bombs near a bridge south of Mosul as an army patrol was crossing. 6 soldiers were killed and 8 people were wounded, 6 of them civilians. Gunmen killed 7 truck drivers, kidnapped 2, and set 3 trucks ablaze in Baghdad's eastern outskirts. Elsewhere in the capital, at least 8 bombs struck the city, killing 40 people and wounding 88. As the bombings are being stepped up, Iraqi Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki vowed that the battle against al-Qaeda would continue. He said any house which is used as a launch pad for an attack by al-Qaeda on Iraqi armed forces would be targeted. The army is locked in a standoff with militants who overran Fallujah, a city west of Baghdad, more than 2 weeks ago in a challenge to Maliki's government. Al-Qaeda loyalists are pursuing a relentless campaign of attacks, mostly aimed at security forces, Shiite civilians, and Sunnis seen as loyal to the Shiite-led government. Polls across Egypt closed after a 2-day referendum on a draft constitution. Voting passed off more peacefully than yesterday, but officials said police arrested at least 79 people during protests by supporters of deposed President Mohamed Morsi. We get more details in this report.
For the second and final day, Egyptians cast their ballots in a referendum on the country's new constitution. The vote is the first since the military deposed President Mohamed Morsi in July. The draft constitution is expected to easily pass, but rights advocates and government opponents complain that the government has stifled dissent and made it impossible for a no campaign to be mounted. The passing of the constitution may set the stage for a presidential bid by Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the man who ousted Morsi following mass protests against the elected Islamist leader. High security was visible at polling stations after 9 people were killed on the first day of voting. In fresh violence today, 2 small bombs went off, one in Cairo and the other in the Nile Delta city of Mahalla, but there were no injuries. The Brotherhood, which backs the jailed Morsi, has called for a boycott and protest over the draft. The new document deletes Islamic language written into the Basic Law, approved a year ago when Morsi was still in office. It also strengthens state bodies that defied him, including the army, the police, and the judiciary. Authorities reported a high turnout on the first day, but today voters turned out appeared to be lower. One voter said it is time for Egyptians to unite following the turmoil after the 2011 uprising that toppled former President Hosni Mubarak.
God willing, a large percentage of the public will vote yes. And for one main reason, we have been through great hardship and been worn out. So, for sure today, people will agree on something, except for a small minority. And as for them, may God give them comfort.
The referendum is a milestone in the political transition plan the army-backed government has built as a path back to democracy, even as it presses a fierce crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood. Farah Ajduni for the News at 10.
Back here at home, Her Majesty Queen Rania Al Abdullah joined the University of Jordan to celebrate Arbor Day and support the university's efforts to replace the trees that were damaged during last month's snowstorm. Along with the president of the university, Khalif Tarawne, vice presidents, deans, faculty members, and students, Her Majesty planted several trees in one of the university's gardens. Queen Rania then spoke with students taking part in an art exhibition that displayed artwork made out of wood collected from cypress and pine trees that were damaged and broken during the blizzard. At the Faculty of Art and Design, the Queen also had the chance to see sculptures made by students from the remains of tree trunks. Her Majesty also met with students from different voluntary initiatives that were launched to help the university overcome the damage caused by the severe weather. Eco-friendly cars took center stage at the 2014 Brussels Car Show. Willing to embrace this new trend, organizers offered an eco-test track to visitors willing to try out some of the most energy-efficient cars on display. With the public becoming more sensitive to environmental issues and the price of petroleum steadily rising, the definition of performance is now focused on efficiency, safety, speed, and the environment. So-called green cars were on display at almost every booth at the 91st edition of the show. We start with NBA action. The Memphis Grizzlies overcame 37 points from Kevin Durant and held on for a hard-fought victory against the Oklahoma City Thunder, beating them 90-87. Courtney Lee led Memphis with a season-high 24 points. Power forward Zach Randolph added 23 and 13 rebounds. The Thunder lost for the 5th time in their last 8 games as they continue to toil without All-Star guard Russell Westbrook.
2 seconds different shot clock to game clock. Durant, corner 3 for the tie. No. Rebound.
From the basketball courts, we go to tennis courts and the Australian Open. Novak Djokovic raced into the 3rd round of the tournament, eager to get the job done and escape the oppressive heat that smothered Melbourne Park for a 2nd day in a row. Djokovic needed a bit under 2 hours to take the second step on the path he hopes will take him to a fourth successive title by thrashing Argentine Leonardo Mayer 6-love, 6-4, 6-4.
And Djokovic. Game set match Djokovic.
In the women's division, world number 1 Serena Williams was her usual mix of elegance and brutality as she dismissed Vesna Dolanc 6-1, 6-2 in pursuit of her 6th title in Melbourne.
Game set match. Williams 2 sets to love, 6-1, 6-2.
And finally, cold and cloudy tonight with northeasterly brisk winds blowing dust in the Badia Desert regions. Tomorrow, cool in most parts of the country and fair in the Jordan Valley with some clouds and northeasterly moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a chilly night and warm tomorrow with northerly winds and slightly choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King and the head of Russia's Federal Agency for Atomic Energy, Rosatom, discuss energy cooperation. The draft state budget is passed after a vote that caps a 3-day debate at the lower house. And Jordan condemns Israeli settlers' assaults on places of worship, including an arson attack on a West Bank mosque. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nanza Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.